Well, now to a royal story making at least one front page this week, the proposed changes to the way that leaseholds are drawn up in the UK. It's supposed to be good news if you're a leaseholder, but possibly not if your landlord happens to be Prince Charles. The Labour peer Lord Berkeley is saying that the residents of the Duchy of Cornwall are worried that they won't get these new leasehold rights and that it isn't a level playing field.
I'm a member of the House of Lords and I live in the Isles of Scilly in my wife's house, and I sort of feel that I have an obligation to reflect the concern that's been expressed to me by many people about the Duchy being able to up the ground rent, up the rents, lengthen or shorten leases, or even in extremis, kick them out of the islands completely. Because, of course, nobody's going to speak out against their landlord or their boss if it's going to mean that they can't sort of live here any longer. And I think that's a very unfair situation to put people in.
Well, we asked royal finance expert David McClure to explain more.
The legislation will affect all freeholders in Britain, with three major exceptions, which happen to be the three royal estates of the Crown Estate, the Queen's Duchy of Lancaster, and Prince Charles's Duchy of Cornwall. The Crown Estate, the two duchies, have said that, they'll abide by the spirit of the law, and even though, they're not governed by it, overall they will, give leaseholders basically the same permission they would have if they were not in the duchy, with three exceptions. First of all, if the property isn't right next to a palace, if the property isn't of some historic importance, or if the property isn't of something of scenic natural beauty. Now, the real problem with the new legislation is that it probably doesn't apply to the Scilly Isles, where the major owner of the property of all the land in the Scilly Isles is Prince Charles's Duchy of Cornwall. Now, in the last 10 years or so, there have been many complaints from tenants saying, oh, the rents are too high, or it's too difficult for us to get an extension of the lease, or it's impossible for us to buy up the freehold. And that means their property is much less valuable. And it should be remembered that last year, the duchy made £22 million in profit, which all goes to Prince Charles. And in the last 20 years, profits have almost gone up by £10 million. So, put crudely, the Duchy of Cornwall is Charles's cash cow. Some tenants in the Scilly Isles say the Duchy of Cornwall is doing this purely to make money. They want high rents, they want high yields, and, it is purely a money-spinning operation. The Duchy, for their part, say, no, all we're trying to do is to protect the natural environment. You would have thought that, if the bill is unfair to certain people, say on the Scilly Isles, then when the bill goes through Parliament, a few MPs might kick up a fuss about it and try and change the legislation. The problem is, if precedent is anything to go by, it's likely to get an easy ride. The reason for that is that any legislation or anything affecting the Queen, according to the laws of procedure in the House of Commons, you cannot criticize the Queen or even senior members of the royal family. So in practice, it's very unlikely that there will be detailed scrutiny of the royal estates if and when this legislation passes through Parliament. Personally, I fail to understand why a leaseholder in the beautiful Isles of Scilly shouldn't have exactly the same rights as a leaseholder in, the beautiful Isle of Wight or even the Isle of Dogs in terms of being able to extend their lease or buy a freehold. Surely it's unfair that one group is being disadvantaged. And surely it's time that we brought all these affairs into the 21st century.
Richard, housing is obviously quite a big issue and a problem in the UK. It's not really a good look, this, is it?
I think this is an absolutely fascinating story. It's one of those stories that sounds really sort of dry, leasehold, but actually it really sort of gets to the heart of the monarchy. It reminds me of the row when Tony Blair abolished the hereditary peers, or most of them. And the royal family actually started to get very nervous because they thought, wait a minute, if we're abolishing the right of someone to inherit a seat in the House of Lords because of an accident of birth, what repercussions could this have for the monarchy? And it's the same with this, that it's our Conservative government is bringing quite a radical reform, actually, to reform a system which has been with us since the Middle Ages. It was actually brought in to help fund the Crusades by the barons who needed some new money. And it's stayed ever since. We've exported it around the world, but now it's only still in use in Britain. And it affects 1 in 5 households across Britain, apparently, I read, which is incredible if true. So it really is quite significant. And I think that although, we've read reports this week that there's going to be an exemption for the royal family, and that's particularly because of the Duchy of Cornwall, which owns vast areas of land. I do think it's a problem, and I personally think they shouldn't have an exemption because they do need to move into the modern world, however painful that is.
Angela, it does seem that the Duchy of Cornwall doesn't have the best reputation with its tenants already. What do you think Prince Charles should do to keep trust and gain trust?
I think he has to understand it. It's difficult for the royal family to understand how ordinary people live, because when they're in the palaces, however much they go out and see people, you don't get the gist of actually how people have to manage their money and their lives. And I hope that he will tell his colleagues, or maybe not colleagues, but the people who are involved in this, to make sure that they do what the right thing and agree with the law that's going through. I find it very baffling as to why they would get exception, and I don't see why they should. And I'm sure that Prince Charles would agree with that once he knows all the details and it's all been balanced out.
We reached out to the Duchy of Cornwall for comment on this, and this is what they had to say. The Duchy of Cornwall takes great care to ensure that anyone purchasing a property where the freehold belongs to the Duchy is made completely aware of the restrictions that may apply.